What if there were beings mentioned in sacred texts that were never meant to be remembered? Hidden between the lines of ancient scripture and crumbling historical records, there are descriptions of entities that don't fit into any accepted doctrine. Neither angel, nor demon, nor man. They appear briefly, disturbingly, and then vanish, erased from most translations, excluded from sermons, and buried beneath centuries of silence. But what were they? Who recorded them? And why were they removed? If you're drawn to uncovering what was hidden, not just from history, but from humanity, subscribe now and follow us into forgotten depths. In the earliest passages of the Bible, there are fleeting references to enigmatic beings, entities that defy clear classification. Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4 speaks of the sons of God who took human women as wives, resulting in the birth of Nephilim. These Nephilim are described as the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown, yet the text offers little else, leaving their true nature shrouded in mystery. Further mentions in Numbers 13:33 depict the Nephilim as giants, so imposing that the Israelites felt like grasshoppers in comparison. These brief accounts raise more questions than answers. Who were these beings? Were they divine, monstrous, or something else entirely? The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text excluded from the canonical Bible, provides additional insights. It introduces the Watchers, a group of angels who descended to earth and, defying divine command, mated with human women. Their offspring were Nephilim, giants who brought chaos and corruption to the world. This union of the celestial and the terrestrial was seen as a grave transgression, leading to the Great Flood as a form of divine retribution. These narratives, though fragmented and often omitted from mainstream teachings, hint at a time when the boundaries between the divine and human realms were blurred. They suggest the existence of beings whose stories have been deliberately obscured, their legacies reduced to whispers in ancient texts. As we delve deeper, we must ask, were these accounts mere myth, or do they point to a shared memory of encounters with entities beyond our understanding? The echoes of these beings resonate not only in biblical scripture, but also across various ancient civilizations, hinting at a common thread woven through humanity's earliest stories. As ancient as the biblical accounts may be, they are far from isolated. When we turn our gaze beyond the borders of Israel and into the wider ancient world, we find shadows of the same beings, described with different names, wrapped in different myths, yet bearing eerily familiar traits. In the ancient lands of Sumer, the oldest known civilization, there are tales of the Anunnaki, powerful beings who descended from the heavens and shaped the destiny of humanity. They were not simply gods in the traditional sense, but intermediaries between realms, beings who brought knowledge, punishment, and, in some cases, chaos. In Egypt, myths speak of entities like Thoth and Osiris, not purely divine, but possessing a strange dual nature, merging the celestial with the mortal. The pharaohs themselves are considered descendants of gods, born of unions between divine forces and human bloodlines. The Greeks told of the Titans primordial beings of immense power and of demigods, heroes born from a union of gods and mortals. Echoes of the Nephilim can be heard in the towering figures of Hercules, Achilles, and Perseus, who bridge the gap between human and divine. Even in the myths of ancient Mesoamerica, there are whispers of sky beings who descended and mingled with mankind, giving rise to bloodlines and legends that spoke of power beyond human comprehension. Across continents and across centuries, these stories repeat the same unsettling theme. Beings from beyond the earth who walked among men, altered their fate, and left behind a legacy of both awe and terror. Different names, different faces, but perhaps the same truth, spoken in many tongues. There is a story whispered through time, not just in sacred texts, but in the collective memory of ancient civilizations. A story of beings from above who came down, not as messengers, but as trespassers, and of their union with the daughters of men. In the biblical tradition, these beings are called the sons of God. Their union with human women produced Nephilim, giants, hybrid offspring said to possess strength beyond human limits and wickedness beyond redemption. These children, born of heaven and earth, were neither fully divine nor fully mortal. They were something else. But this tale is not confined to Genesis. In Mesopotamia, legends speak of semi-divine kings who claimed descent from the gods. In Greece, the children of Zeus and mortal women became heroes, feared and worshipped alike. In India, the The Mahabharata tells of mighty warriors born from gods and humans, cursed to bring ruin and fire to the world. In every version of the myth, one truth repeats. When the bloodlines of heaven mix with those of the earth, the result is imbalance, chaos, power too great to remain hidden. These hybrids often rise and fall violently, as if their very existence is a violation of the natural order. Some cultures celebrated them as heroes. Others feared them as monsters. But the pattern is clear: a divine intrusion, a forbidden union, and a consequence that echoes through time. Perhaps these were not just legends. Perhaps they were warnings. Throughout history, civilizations face a choice when confronted with beings that defy their understanding. Those who walk between the realms of mortal and divine. Some chose to exalt them. Others chose to erase them. In the biblical world, these beings were cast out. The Watchers were bound, their offspring, the Nephilim, destroyed by flood. Their names became synonymous with corruption, and their memory was silenced in the canonical texts. Books that spoke too openly of their deeds, like the Book of Enoch, were removed, hidden, or declared heretical. But not all cultures reacted the same way. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were revered. Temples were built in their name. Rulers traced their bloodlines back to them. They became gods, feared, worshipped, obeyed. In Egypt, the divine human hybrids were crowned. The pharaoh was not merely king. He was a living god, a child of heaven and earth. Rituals, tombs, and laws reinforced this belief for millennia. In Greece, the demigods stood at the heart of mythology. Their stories were taught to inspire and to warn. Hercules, Perseus, and others were celebrated, yet always met with suffering, as if to remind mortals that divine blood carried a terrible weight. But as time passed, these beings began to vanish from public narrative. Their temples crumbled. Their stories were rebranded as myths. Some were demonized, others forgotten, and still others remained in the shadows, transformed into symbols, distorted by new religions, renamed as angels, saints, or devils. Why were some exalted while others were erased? Perhaps the answer lies in control. For a being that walks between heaven and earth challenges every human hierarchy. It disrupts doctrine. It threatens order. So the stories were rewritten. The names changed. And what couldn't be controlled was buried. We like to believe that history moves forward, that what belonged to the ancient world stays buried in the past. But some truths are not confined to time. The beings once described in sacred texts and mythologies did not simply vanish. Their names may have changed. Their stories may have been rewritten, but their presence still lingers. We see echoes of them in symbols carved into temples, etched into coins, hidden in the architecture of cathedrals and government buildings. We hear their names in rituals, in prayers, in stories passed down from those who still remember, even if only in fragments. Across centuries, secret societies have claimed descent from divine bloodlines. Esoteric teachings speak of watchers, ascended masters, and unseen guides. And in the darkest corners of religion and power, whispers continue of those who never truly left. Some believe these beings still influence the world, not as legends, but as forces, invisible, timeless, patient. Perhaps that's why so many of their names were erased. Perhaps the silence wasn't to protect us from myth, but from memory. Because if they're still here, watching, waiting, then the past is not over. It's only sleeping. And one day, it may wake again.